Well, welcome everyone. I'm so glad that you're here today. If you are here to talk with us about culturally intelligent communication, you are in the right place, and we're going to have a really fantastic conversation today. My name is Dr. Megan Pollock, and I'm the founder of Engineer Inclusion, also called Engineered Organizations now. And I live in Southeast Texas, in Orange, Texas, and I am thrilled to be talking to you all about this today. Culturally intelligent communication has been something that I have written and published about quite a lot over the last few years, and it is one of the most popular talks that I am invited to give, particularly across some of my industry clients. And so we're going to be talking about culturally intelligent communication today in manufacturing specifically, but I guarantee you it's going to be beyond manufacturing. I want to also thank Bossier Parish Community College and their Center for Teaching and Learning, thanking Monica Lawrence and Dana Spires with a grant for the Women in STEM programming. And so if you've missed some of our other Women in STEM events, I will send you an email after today's event to point you in the direction of some of the past panels that we've had both this year and last year as well. So I am thrilled to introduce my panelists to you today. We have first Briana Doucet. She is an IT SAP Analyst at Cintas and a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt with a background in manufacturing and service industries. A servant leader and a distinguished communicator, she leverages her industrial engineering degree from Louisiana State University to drive business results through logical decision making and collaborative problem solving. Briana, you want to say hi?
Hello, everyone.
Excellent. Next, we have Lisa Demore. She is the Vice President of DEI at CADIA, where she helps organizations design and implement strategic DEI programs, and she leads CADIA's Accelerator DEI certification program. With 30 years of experience in manufacturing and certifications in Six Sigma and DEI, Lisa combines her expertise in process design, continuous improvement, and root cause analysis to foster organizational growth. Lisa, do you want to say hi?
Absolutely. Hello, hello. It's a pleasure to be here with Brianna and Megan both.
Thanks so much. Now, let's dive in. This first question we're going to start with, I'm going to ask both of my panelists. So, the first question is, what does culturally intelligent communication mean to you, and why is it essential? Essential. So, let's start with you, Brianna.
So, culturally, excuse me, culturally intelligent means to me being able to adapt and listen to other perspectives. And when I say adapt, being able to put yourself in their shoes, being able to communicate, interact, and just immerse yourself in another person's perspective. And I am going to add in the workplace, this helps us reach a common goal and work on a common task. So, being able to say, hey, Brianna is from the South, right? Lisa earlier say, yes, ma'am. She was able to adapt and say, I see why she's saying yes, ma'am. She was raised in the South. That's part of her culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I have that same culture. Thanks so much, Brianna. Okay, Lisa, what about you? What's your definition of culturally intelligent communication, and why is it essential?
A lot of people think when they hear cultural that it's global. And a lot of it is. There are so many global companies out there that's driving the need for us to learn to work across those different global cultures. But like Brianna just pointed out, you can have cultural differences in different parts of a country, a state, a city even. So for me, culturally intelligent communication it means just that you're culturally aware enough and interested enough that you want to hear what other people think and how they approach the problem, and that you're willing to work with them instead of against them. And this is absolutely critical. With the globalization of work, with the virtual and remote nature of work that's come on board, people are less, fewer and fewer people are in the same facility, and face to face is so much easier sometimes. Did I just show my generation? It might be. I don't know. Um, in order to have that competitive advantage and really attract the top talent, you've got to be in an environment where people want to leverage each other um, to do the best possible job that they can do. So that's my angle on it.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Something you said Brianna, and I think that connects again with what you're saying is you said to put yourself in others' shoes. And when I hear that, to me, it just screams empathy, right? The ability to sort of connect and lean in and understand somebody else's experiences. And so, as both of you are saying, like culture isn't just global, it means different ways of knowing and doing and being, and recognizing that when we lead with empathy, when we lead with understanding, that allows us to be more culturally intelligent because we're not jumping to sort of conclusions that can create barriers. So, with that, let's move to the second question. So, how have you seen cultural diversity impact communication within teams or organizations? Lisa, let's start with you.
So I I had the pleasure of having a conversation with an employee resource group that was started in a company just outside of Battle Creek, Michigan. And in that particular part of the state, there's a huge Burmese population in the community. And what they found is that as people from that community came to work at their company, they naturally clung together for language, for culture, for translation, just for that familiarity. And what happened was that they developed an accommodation for this group of people in order to not violate HIPAA, right? So they had an online health assessment that people had to take. And the only way they could do it, because some of these people did not speak English, was to have an HR person translate it, which is a direct violation, right? So by then coding the software, and Brianna's in IT, I have no idea how IT works. I just know you turn it on and you turn it off. But they created a portal that allowed them to complete this health assessment in their native language. So they lowered the risk for the corporation. They increased the buy-in of these particular individuals and employees because, wow, you're providing it for me in my language, but you don't speak my language. And they set themselves up for as an example because now they have it translated into several different languages. So recognizing that there is a need from some cultures and some groups of people for that type of, I don't even want to say accommodation, but for that type of investment in them to allow them to be fully engaged at work, um, I think that's great. And then they built the ERG around that, and they're constantly finding a way for this group of people to communicate internally and externally on their line and outside of their line. It's a phenomenal example of cultural awareness.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa. Brianna, I
Mhm.
think you said you had something you wanted to add to this question as well.
Yes. How have I seen it and actually had to be a leader in the midst of it? During my time as a production supervisor in a food manufacturing environment, a lot of my partners were Cambodian. A lot of them were from Asia, totally different culture, right? So it was up to me as the leader, as a young leader, fresh out of college, to figure out how do I make this an inclusive environment, knowing there's a language barrier. Tools are very slim. And when I say tools, because you have noise barriers, language barriers, you want to come to work, get straight on a production line and run your product. So I made it a point to just learn more about their culture. Hey, tell me about your culture. How do you communicate about this? What is something that I may do? Because I'm a very hands talker, facial expressions, smiling. It might not be okay in your culture. So making sure as a young leader, I open the doors right away for them to come and let me know what they believe is okay, what is not okay, and then the same for me as a leader. Hey, this is okay in my culture. This is how I lead, and just making an inclusive environment across the board.
And I
Yeah,
think,
I
you hit on something there. I'm sorry, Megan.
go
People
ahead.
that function well as inclusive leaders are culturally aware, right? By nature. You've got that empathy and that curiosity that you want to learn. And that's one of the biggest things I think um, in adapting and conquering cultural diversity in the workplace and making it work for you instead of against you. It's a great
And
example of curiosity, Brianna.
thank you. And I will add, currently Cintas does a really good job, and my thoughts are my own, but they do a good job at translations, right? We are a very safe company. Safety is like the number one goal. If you're not safe, might not be the place for you. My personal thoughts. But as a production leader, I had partners that spoke fluent Vietnamese. I feel comfortable as a leader walking in with safety training in their language and what they decided to speak in, right? I didn't make them translate into English. So that made me feel better as a leader and my partners working with me.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
thanks.
think you're leading right into the third question. Hit it, Megan.
Well, I want to connect to something you said just now, Lisa, about inclusive leaders. And so one of the power components of being an inclusive leader is that you not only see cultural diversity, you celebrate it. And you
Right.
recognize that there is such power in diversity. And so when we talk about cultural diversity, we're not just talking about differences and like from like a deficit mindset of like there's something wrong, we need to fix it.
Right.
The best leaders, the best cultural communicators see difference and celebrate it and see it for the asset, the value that it brings to any kind of work and learning environment. So with
Mhm.
that, let's go ahead and shift to the next question. So what are some of those common barriers to effective communication in a diverse workplace, and how do you address them?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump on what Brianna was saying about the language issue. There's time zones, there's generational preferences, there's technology, remote versus in person, all those kind of things. But I want to jump on the language thing because it is something that I think is underappreciated and that we just had an experience with. I facilitate a certification course, and our last cohort was the first time I had more than one non-English native speaker. And what I found is we didn't have a good live translation service to be able to offer. But there are companies out there who have leveraged, I believe it's Teams, and there's an add-on there that will do live translation of not just words, but content. Because it's one thing to translate the words and it's another to translate the meaning, right? So I think that is one of the common barriers. And then the other, the generational thing where boomers and Xers, we like to talk to people, talk with our hands. Brianna and I apparently are going to have a whole conversation without any words later. Um, but texting versus calling versus meeting face to face versus an informal conversation over coffee, I think some of those can create some communication barriers as well.
Yeah, and the barriers, are different for different populations. So something that I talk about, and I think Lisa probably you do as well in your work, are the barriers around systemic inequities. And so for people from traditionally marginalized and excluded populations, they're facing all kinds of barriers that those of us who might be from dominant groups don't experience. And so all of these things like micro messages, micro inequities, microaggressions, just general kinds of oppressive things that happen in a workspace, this also becomes noise that affects their cognitive ability to hear and to actually effectively communicate. And so, when we're talking about people with neurodivergence, people who are hard of hearing, any kind of disability, as well, like these create some barriers in a workplace that we have to also consider. Brianna, you unmuted. What are you thinking about?
You touched on it, right? From my personal experience, I know in my first position, fresh out of college, I traveled to different manufacturing plants across the United States. And you had to be aware. You had to be culturally intelligent. The barriers, you had atmospheric barriers, um, noise. You're moving, you're trying to continue working, but you also had like cultural barriers. And if you weren't aware of those barriers, you can cause a lot of noise as a leader in your own team.
Mhm.
So that's just something I would add as a young leader. I still consider myself young. Even, just as a young leader, being aware, that's an area you can really practice in and reach out to your leadership team. If you're going into a new environment, hey, what are the things I need to be aware of? How do I immerse myself into their demographics or even just their economic status? Learn more about it.
Yeah. Yeah, just as a reference point here, leadership has already come up quite a bit, and that was the topic of our panel back on January 29th. And so look for that if you want to catch up on that panel to hear about human-centered leadership as well. Okay, so let's move forward and talk about specific examples of how you've adapted your communication style to connect with a diverse team or audience.
Go get him, Brianna. I love your answer to this one.
My mom is actually on this call, so she's probably laughing. Shout out to mom. A specific example of how I've
Hey,
adapted
mom.
my speed. I come from a fast talking Creole Cajun culture, down hard Texas, Louisiana mixed family. In our household, we're over talking each other. We're loud. You're talking fast. If you catch it, you catch it. If not, catch up later. So that is something I had to work on as a leader and just as a young employee, right? College graduate, just throughout life. Hey, slow down, take your time, especially if you're dealing with an employee who may be hard of hearing or not be able to catch up with the speed. Sometimes you just got to stop, work through the conversation, slow down. I don't know how many times growing up I heard slow down, slow down, slow down. So now I'm just like, okay, sit back. So that's a major way I have adapted.
Yeah, you say that so well. I just want to bring in my own upbringing. I come from a relatively sarcastic family. Sarcasm was our number one defense mechanism. And and then I went into engineering, and engineering engineers, however many we have on the call, we're not known as great communicators, right? We talk in bullet points, and we're very abrupt and to the point. Um, and so I had to learn to communicate, to actually put the message first and then the information behind it. So I had to put things in the right order. Um, I was I was less successful earlier in my career as a young person, um, in getting my point across because I didn't understand nuance and I didn't understand how to um, how to put those things forward that were important. The other thing that I will say, being neurodivergent, there are times when a phone call doesn't work for me, right? Like the phones that we all have, they're not used to actually call people, are they? We just use them to text and send emails, right? So understanding when I have to make a phone call versus when I can send an email or a text and it's appropriate, to work within, how my brain operates has been an accommodation, an adaptation that I've had to make as well, kind of on the fly. Oh, and hi, Mom.
At least it's funny that you bring up engineers and it's funny that you bring up engineers and bullet points because this was something I learned at a pivot point in my career. So I was trained as a communicator in engineering and industry and was taught to you write emails with bullets, you highlight things in like red italics and you highlight, some things in yellow because you're planning on people skimming it. And then when I started working as a director for a national nonprofit, within about 2 weeks of being employed, I had a meeting with my boss, the CEO, and there had been like an uproar of like Megan's emails are too much. They're offending us. And I was like, what do you mean? What's wrong with bullets? But in that communication world, in that environment, they were not accustomed to that. And so I was told, you're going to have to start your emails with hello, how are you? I hope that you had a lovely weekend. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is not how I want to communicate. But it was a forced adaptation. And I still never adapted to their style, which was like writing blocks of text. Um, but yeah, we have to learn to adapt. And I still love a bulleted email though.
We got a numbered email on our way into this conversation today, just so anybody.
Okay, I know. I
We
still
were
love it.
this close to bullets, weren't we, Megan? This
I
close.
know. I do love a bulleted email. Okay, so let's shift to the next question. And this question I'm going to open up to the audience as well because we want to know what tools that you're using. But what tools, techniques, or approaches have you found most effective for fostering inclusive communication in manufacturing and beyond? And so again, this is a Slido poll, so we want this to be co-created. So whatever resources that you're using and loving, please share those with us as well. Brianna, do you want to start this time?
No, Lisa.
Oh, Lisa. Okay, good. Lisa, you got
Okay.
it.
Um, in the manufacturing facility, you have so many people that don't have email addresses, right? You have to find a way to talk to folks that aren't electronically connected to everything all the time. I've never worked in a facility that had anything like Discord or Slack or anything like that that was outside of email. So I hate to say it's a tool or a technique or a trick or, a trick. But we had to resort to a good old-fashioned bulletin board
Mhm.
at times, you know, printing out pages and pages of information and putting it up on the bulletin board. And then we got smarter and we started putting QR codes, a teaser and a QR code on the bulletin board and allowing people to scan it and consume it at their leisure in a different room. The other thing we've done is we've gamified it a little bit. And this is prior to my work with Cadia, but we would gamify it. We would make it something you could do at the lunch table, right? A couple of different things that you could do. Some of them were as simple as I'm playing with my pen, but uh, a 3x5 card and a Sharpie and 2 minutes of thinking, and then you can share all these ideas across the table. And I can tell more about that little exercise later if anybody's interested. But yeah, getting back to basics, right? Put it up on the wall, make it consumable for people who have to account for every second of their time at work.
Mhm. Same thing. I think
Okay.
the production line is just like the old game telephone that we used to play in elementary school. And you better hope and make it to the end of the line, right? Um, Shift meetings at the beginning, anytime we were running a project or any type of change, Six Sigma Lean, put it on the board. You make one change, every step of the process, make sure it was on the board. And for those that have a creative side, it helps with that, right? You get to make it pretty, decorate, whatever. But people like to see and people like to be heard at the end of the day. No one likes to show up to work and not know what's going on. So that was the biggest thing my team will focus on. I know Lisa said in the lunch table we will have the little table tents. That worked out. You're watching TV, we had a TV in the break room, you're playing the game, QR code. We use a lot of those techniques, but at the end of the day, everybody wants to be heard. So I think the bulletin board where everyone's coming in and out of the building, that was our best technique in every situation I've ever been in.
Yeah, thanks. So some commonalities between what you're both saying is really a part of this framework. So the listen framework, I put it on the Slido poll and I also put it in the chat. And this is one of the tools I use to teach across industries. And I named it the listen framework, but it's really so if you remember nothing less, the key is to listen. But the tool to becoming a culturally intelligent communicator is to listen in a way that one, L means that we are learning. We're actively learning about different cultures and we're trying to develop cultural competence within those things. Next is I, so we are inquiring. That means we're asking questions and taking an active interest in others' viewpoints. My favorite questions that you can ask are, what else? Tell me more and go on. They're the simplest questions that get people to keep unraveling their thoughts and their minds. S, which is the third letter in listen, is to synthesize. So this is where we're integrating diverse perspectives in our decision making. So if you want to create a culturally inclusive learning environment or work environment, then you have to be incorporating people's ideas into those decisions. So if you're creating solutions for populations that may be, not from the dominant group, how are you actively engaging them to say like, hey, is this addressing your needs? Are we actively meeting your needs with the solution? Because otherwise we're just doing things that don't really matter. The T part of the listen framework is to translate. So how are we applying those cultural insights to improve environments? The E is for empathize, and I wish I could put it at the beginning, but E doesn't isn't the first letter of listen. But all of this is about empathy. Like, how are we connecting emotionally to people? How are we humanizing their experiences and thoughtfully considering their experiences within the systems and institutions that we live in? And then N is the last letter of the framework, and that's to navigate. Like, how are we adapting flexibly to diverse cultural environments? And so you can read more about that on my website, and I'll send it to you afterwards. But that is a tool and technique that has been gaining traction with many of my clients. And so I hope that's useful for you all as well. Okay, so let's move to the next question. Oh, we had some contribution here as well, offering different ways to contribute to accommodate those who think, speak quickly, and to those who want to mull on something. Yeah, this is a great point here. So often, like yesterday, I was in a board meeting, and somebody wanted to go into a brainstorming mode, and a couple of people were like, yeah, I don't brainstorm well at 7 p.m. Like I brainstorm better at 9 a.m. And then somebody was like, yeah, I need to do some offline brainstorming before we get to the collective brainstorming. And so by listening to all of those sort of preferences, it allows us to create a solution that's really designed for people. So we ended up creating a survey that allows people to brainstorm that way, and then we're going to bring it all together. And so the key here is that we're listening to people. One, we give space for people to share, and
Mhm.
two, we're listening to their contributions. So thank you for those that
Absolutely.
what you shared.
Megan, if I can just jump in for a second,
Please.
that's the definition of running an inclusive meeting, right? Is getting the information out there for those who need to process ahead of time. Make It's like publishing an agenda, making sure that the location is understood, the electronic connection, the logistics, so that everybody can participate, prepare, and then participate to their fullest extent. Those are great things, you know, tips and tricks for having inclusive meetings for sure.
Yeah, and it's part of being culturally intelligent is recognizing even though it's not something you need, it might be
Mhm.
something someone else needs.
Right.
I To me, I don't need an agenda at the beginning of a meeting, but I know some people do. So even though my agenda was simple, I still offered it because I think it reduces anxiety for some people. And so again, it's that awareness of different ways of knowing and doing and being really thoughtful to that and providing space for those
Yep,
different things.
absolutely.
Yes.
So let's talk about this. A time when your communication skills um, helped resolve a conflict or improve team dynamics in a culturally diverse setting. So, Brianna, you want to start us off here?
Yeah. I know Lisa talked about being sarcastic earlier. I am a very sarcastic person, but at the same time, I'm one of those that I don't mind throwing myself out there. And that is one tip, trick, whatever you want to call it. That's something I use all the time when it comes to working in teams or in meetings, right? I always throw myself out there. Hey, we're going to work on this issue. Let me tell you about my experience. And I don't mind talking about a very bad experience where maybe I messed up a run or, didn't catch something. And I've learned that that has made people feel like I can breathe. Let's work through this. We're not recreating anything, right? We're just going to work through it. I feel more vulnerable. There's no right or wrong answer. And it just really helps everyone. I know in the last slide, someone was basically talking about someone that may not speak up quickly. And then you have partners that do speak up quickly. So I always try and throw myself out there first and my experiences. And depending on the situation, maybe it's a very bad experience. That way, those that don't speak up, they feel like the weight is lifted off their shoulders. And hey, I can speak up that maybe I didn't catch that issue on the run. And they're speaking from a production environment. I know I keep saying runs.
Yeah, thanks for that clarification.
We understand that. My goodness, Brene Brown would be so proud of you, I have to
Hey, she's
say.
one of my favorites.
Absolutely. When you're talking about that vulnerability and that willingness to put yourself out there first, that's super. I always joke that I want to be the first one to raise my hand when I made a mistake,
Mhm.
right? Which also sets the tone. It's that humility and not the oh my God, I spill out my entire life story, but that vulnerability to let people know that it is a psychologically safe environment, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing by admitting you make mistakes. You're setting people up to feel psychologically safe, right? I'm admitting it, I'm challenging the status quo, I'm doing all the things that model the behavior that we want to have in a team meeting where we have something that we have to get done. Um, I used to lead a change management meeting, and the engineer started every sentence with no but. You could say the grass is green, and Jim would pop in and he would say no but, and then he would, agree, whatever. So, and that had such a disruptive influence on the team that I actually put it on a bulletin board. We were meeting in person for the most part, and I put it on a bulletin board facing him, right?
Uh-huh.
Don't say no, but. He didn't talk for like 2 weeks straight in the meeting because he didn't know how to adapt, right?
Yes,
So I,
and yes, and
hello, yes, yes. How many people learn that way too late in their life? That
I
yes
learned
and
it
is
in
the right way to
improv
answer a
class.
question.
I
That's
learned the yes
awesome.
and from improv.
Right. I'd venture to say many, many people learn it too late in their life. So I combined recognizing the impact it was having on the group
Hmm.
with a sense of humor.
Hmm.
And he was one who could take a sense, he could take a little poke at him. So I like to do that in case nobody can tell. I like to have fun when I'm working. So bringing a little humor into it, um, making something that is commonly known, and then I talk to him ahead of time, right, to let him know the team's not functioning as well as it could, and I just want to try to teach you a new tool that you can utilize to help it move forward. And then on the back end, I used quantitative surveys for the team. How are we doing in terms of effectiveness and efficiency? So a sense of humor, some direct communication, and then some quantitative measurement of how are we doing, utilizing all those to implement a continuous improvement idea and then see the impact. So lots of different things involved there, but that's a bunch of the different things that I've thrown up against a wall, and most of them have stuck. So
And I do
Yeah,
want to
so
add, oh, I'm
go
sorry,
ahead,
Megan.
please.
In the chat, transparency. Be transparent as to why you incorporated some folks' input and not
that's a
others.
good one.
That is a big one, right? And it kind of falls into this question. If you're transparent at the beginning, hey, we're meeting, this is the end goal, this is what we want to come up with, these are the tools we're going to use, and we may not take everyone's input or suggestions, that clears a lot of the mud.
Yeah, something building on your example of the no but guy. I literally read, I think it was Amy Poehler's book, like, and then I heard about the sort of power of sand, and it is the number one rule of improv of like if you have a scene and you say no but, it cuts the scene, right? So to build any kind of improv scene, it has to be okay and you're building, right? And that was when I first realized those terms. And so when I think about helping to coach people and their language, I always want to replace it with, okay, so don't say no, but what I think you really mean is yes, and right. And so to building on that, because when we're helping people to sort of face some of the ways of knowing and doing that have been so normal for them, we always want to try to replace a tool of like, okay, this is how we've always said it. Here's what you actually mean. So let's say this, and talking about like how it can really shut down different conversations, and realizing sort of motivation sort of theory in that. Another thing that both of you talked about was the sort of notion of humility and like sort of recognizing when we need to make those changes. I want to share an example of like what not to do, and why cultural intelligence is really useful and important. When I was in grad school, for my PhD, I was emailing my committee. They happened to all be women, and they were all pretty close to my age, within like 8 to 10 years. And so they were, early career faculty. And I was emailing them to coordinate a meeting because we were all going to be in the same city at the same time because I wasn't on campus anymore. And I said, ladies, so I'm from Texas. So if you're from the South, that word is a normal word for addressing people. I had one of my professors write back to me of, you will call me Dr. So-and-so, and from here on out. Now, the difference, the cultural awareness here is she's from Turkey. So her cultural awareness of like how I have been trained to sort of communicate, and it created a really big barrier. And I got offended and she got offended, and like there was no humility in that. There was no like awareness of like, hey, let's talk about what just happened and understand each other. But it just became a pretty intense wall between us. And it affected how we were able to work together, which is somebody on your PhD committee is a pretty big deal, right? And so learning these tools earlier would have helped me substantially. And so much of that comes from that humility of like, approaching that person and saying, you know what? I understand you are offended by how I address that email. I'm really sorry, right? And taking accountability for that and saying, like, in my culture, this is a very common way that we address people. I meant no harm. And again, if we learn to have those tough conversations, it can improve our conversations and reduce barriers. So that leads us really well into the next question about feedback. So, what role does feedback play in fostering culturally intelligent communication, and how do you model it as a leader?
Well, you gave a great example, right? Your colleague was upset and offended, and you gave a sincere apology. And I
Oh, I
really
didn't.
think,
I wish I did.
oh, you wish you had. All
uh,
right, so
I
from
wish
now
I had.
on, I think feedback is an opportunity to ask questions again. It's an opportunity to be curious about how did we get to this point? What did I do? What can I own? And I'm not going to worry about what my intent was. I want to know what my impact was.
Mhm.
So asking for feedback and then acting on it. You can ask for feedback all day long and you can give feedback all day long. And if nobody wants it and you don't want it, it's a waste of hot air.
Mhm.
So my first 360 was a gut punch. Oh my gosh, could have knocked me over with a feather. I was ready to quit entirely, go crawl into a cave for the rest of my life. And then when I went back and I started asking people, I got this feedback. Can you give me an example of when I've done this? When I've exhibited this behavior? So I got curious about it. I asked
Mhm.
for more information and then I acted on it. There were people that did not want a sense of humor when we were in a particular setting. They did not
Okay.
want a joke. So, okay, I understand now. And there were reasons behind it. Um, and I understood the impact. Um, so I personally love feedback. When you said you were going to ask for feedback at the end of this session, Megan, and then supply it back to us, I'm like, thank goodness. I didn't spend my career in manufacturing and continuous improvement to not try to improve on what we're doing every day. So feedback is critical, but only if you're gonna do something with it.
Yeah.
And I agree with Lisa. 100%. When I switched industries, I got feedback after feedback to the point that I felt like I was always in my mentor's office. Now I look back and I'm like, man, that's what saved me, right? I'm able to mentor, I'm able to be aware, don't make that same mistake. And it kind of changed. At first, I would tell her, I don't want to hear it, right? What young leader? I mean, when you're young, I hate to say it, young and think you know everything, right? But finally, I realized, hey, if I don't accept the feedback, this is just going to be a rough road.
Mhm.
So if I had a major meeting or made a major change, at the end of the day, at the end of the shift, I would go to my mentor's office and say, hey, what did they say? How was the response? What do you think? And ask different people that were higher up than me in the leadership team, what did you see? Just to be able, and that just made me a stronger leader. That also helps me make my team stronger because I became more comfortable having those conversations. It opened up the door that if I did offend you, let's talk about it. And I
Mhm.
will say,
Yeah.
from a manufacturing perspective, timely feedback. You got to have it right then and there,
Mhm.
not later,
Absolutely.
not next week. You're just, like you say, hot air, but that hot air is growing on that production floor. So
Yep.
Yeah.
timely, right away, and it has to be a two-way street.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you
I
you
appreciate
mentioned a
that.
lot. I'm
Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
Megan. I was just going to pop in for a second.
Yeah.
You mentioned feedback from above. I learned the most when I asked people who worked with me and for me,
Mhm.
or who I was responsible for feedback. And I think as a people leader, that's one of the most important things you can do is ask people, what can I do better? What can I do to make your job easier? What can I do better to improve your quality, the quality of your experience here at our company? And that comes specifically from my time in manufacturing because I didn't make anything. They
And I'm
could
a
have gotten rid of me. The bottom line wouldn't have
right,
changed, right?
and
It was
I'm
the
not
people touching
piggybacking,
it. Yep.
but you right there. I'm gonna say this, Megan, and I'm gonna in the question. What Lisa just said is the biggest thing ever. putting yourself in their shoes and asking the people that you work with, those that are doing that, they've been doing that job for years. I mean, I had one employee that worked in the same position for 50 years. He taught me, he taught everyone else, asking them, how do you do this? What can make your job better? What do you not like? What makes your job hard will also make your job as a leader 10 times easier.
Mhm.
Yeah. Lisa, something you mentioned earlier was that of psychological safety, and we both talk all of us have talked about inclusive leadership. And so especially when we want to receive feedback from people who might be our direct reports or maybe hierarchically at a different level so that power is at play, we have a responsibility to create psychological safety so that people feel like they can give us feedback. Because if there is any sort of feeling of like, if I give feedback, something might happen, right? Then we aren't creating inclusive environments where people can thrive. And so a culturally intelligent communicator, a culturally intelligent leader is somebody who is paying attention to that. They're reading the room, they're paying attention to the people that they work with so that they are reducing those power dynamics and creating space for people to actually share. And one way to make sure that people share is to, as both Briana and Lisa have said, is like you got to do something with the feedback. If people give you feedback and you never do anything, like they're not going to want to give you more feedback. And so we could talk about feedback for a whole afternoon, I think, or more. And because it's one of the things I love talking about. And I put a couple of links in the chat on how to receive feedback with cultural intelligence, an article there, and then another article on how to plan feedback by prioritizing inclusion. And again, I will share these with you after today's session. So this question I want to do as an open panel to the audience, and then we'll sort of shift to see if there's any Q&A from the audience as well. Looks like we don't have any questions on the Slido yet, so we've still got some time. But this question is, what advice would you give to leaders or professionals who want to improve their cultural intelligence and communication skills? And I'm going to open this up as a Slido to the audience. So we wanted to hear what advice you might offer as well. And so I've lost track of who's going first here. So Lisa or Brianna, either one of you dive in here with some advice.
Lisa, you want to start?
I sure will. I'll kick us off. I'm going to go with alliteration because I enjoy that as well. I'm going to say something that Brianna has modeled. You've got to be curious. If you're not curious about how people are different from you or how people are the same, what's common and what's different, if you're not curious about that, it's not gonna, you're not gonna make strides, right? Then you have to step out of your comfort zone and be courageous and ask the questions and have the conversations that might not be easy, right? And then committed. You know, I got curious, I got courageous, it blew up in my face. I'm done. Can't do that either. You've got to be committed to the process. You have to be willing to step, all the way out of your comfort zone through the learning zone, ask the questions, make the mistakes into the growth zone to be able to communicate. You can utilize this with I supervised some folks and the three team leaders that I had. When I asked them, what can I do differently for you? They all told me something different. So then I had to individually communicate with them. And that's when I learned not to be a micromanager, not to put things, not to rely on verbal communication, to rely on written communication for one of them. And for the other one, specify a timeline because it was going to get done. Just I didn't say by when. So for each of them, I had to be curious. I had to ask for the feedback. I had to be courageous and committed enough then to do something different than what I had been doing. Um, and I think if you do that, you'll be able to make strides. You'll be able to work across generations and cultures and languages and socioeconomic status and education levels and all the different things that contribute to people being culturally different.
That was very well put, Lisa. Very well put.
Thanks.
And I agree 100%. What advice would I give to leaders or professionals? I would say Lisa's been touching on this through this entire panel. Psychological safety, understanding psychological safety. My mindset as a leader was always this might be the only safe place my employee has to go during the day for 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever the shift is. When they come here, I want them to feel safe to speak up, to complete their job. I want them to feel good. So I think psychological safety is a big thing that as professionals we have to really tune into and lock in before we try and become culturally intelligent and then learn more about their culture and who they are because we should be able to immerse ourselves in their culture and give them a safe inclusive environment at the same time.
Mhm. Yeah, I just want to touch on the third comment on the screen, Megan, if I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
Actively learning about different cultures. It was probably 10 years ago for the first time I worked with a gentleman from southern India. And we had a language thing, we had a communication style thing. We were not jiving, but we worked very closely together. Um, and we ended up being sent up to Detroit for an American Society of Quality training that we had to go to. And he brought his wife, whose English was worse than his, but still better than my Hindi, which was non-existent. And I asked him, why did you bring your wife? And he said, we're going to go to temple. We like to go to temple when we're up there. It's a larger Hindu population. I'm like, really? I've never been to a Hindu temple. Curious, right? And then we went, and I had to be courageous enough because I had no clue what was going to be expected of me as soon as I went through the door, right? Um, and then committed. We went all the way through the day. I had to stay with his wife in certain areas. I was not aware that I could not go in the same areas. Women could not mix with men in certain areas of the temple. And then committed enough to talk about it over dinner afterwards, right? To try and understand even more. So, and wouldn't you know, when we got back from that business trip, my first and only time in a Hindu temple, all of a sudden we were able to work through all of the other differences just because just because of that opportunity to get to know each other just that little bit better. So, um, and that was one that actually did involve culture. So I thought I'd share that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lisa. What I like about that is your curiosity, and I want to add that sometimes that can be a really big ask for somebody, right? To say like, please introduce me to your culture. And so there's something about the relationship that you had already formed that allowed you to be able to make that ask. One of the things I always advise people when we talk about actively learning about different cultures is that doesn't mean go ask your one friend to represent all cultures, right? It means being really curious and looking at films and books and podcasts and social media feeds by people and learning in those kinds of ways rather than saying, please, friend, tell me about your culture and represent all people like you. That's not their job, unless you're really close to them and they want to represent those things. Because there's so many sources of content today to learn, whether you want to read memoirs, or you want to read just novels. Like there's so many ways to learn about different cultures. And so one of the tools that I've used over the years is to take an annual focus of like, this year I'm going to read about anti-racist practices. This year I'm going to read about the trans experiences, so that it doesn't feel overwhelming, like you have to learn about all identities at once, but sort of take a annual focus or a quarterly focus, whatever, on what your learning journey is going to be about different ways of knowing, doing, and being. And again, I like the first and fourth comment here on the screen as well, that are both about actively listening, and asking questions so that you really learn people's experiences. So thank you all for that. So this last question is the last question that we've prepared today, and I still see I don't have any questions popping up on the Slido yet, but I'll keep looking, and you're also welcome to drop those questions in the chat as well. But this is our sort of final question of the hour. And with this, Lisa and Brianna, I want you to sort of offer your final sort of closing thoughts for us as well. So what can organizations do to prioritize and support culturally intelligent communication at all levels So give us a response for this and with your final thoughts on the topic.
I can
Lisa?
go, absolutely. Let me lead us down the path, shall we? I think there's a couple of different things. One is to educate people, right? Educate your organizations and your leaders and your individual contributors on what you're asking them to do, whether it's to treat people with respect, whether it's to try to foster belongingness, whether it's to help onboard new hires to make them feel like they deserve to be there. So educate people on what you want, and then continue on a daily basis to hold them accountable for demonstrating the behavior that you want them to exhibit. So educate them, hold them accountable, and just remember that the entire culture of the entire company is defined by the worst behavior it tolerates. So if you let one dude get away with one slur, that defines your entire culture. So educate, accountability, and be aware of what's being tolerated so that you can address that. Over to you,
Thanks so
Brian.
much, Lisa. Brianna.
I think we both agreed on this one. Educate, educate, educate. And I think personally, just be aware of what's being tolerated. Be aware. Be aware of what you also tolerate personally as a leader outside of your organization. Um, Whatever you do at your house is your business, but ultimately, what you allow is what you become. And I strongly believe in that. So be aware that, I was always told what you laugh at, you allow. And as a leader, that is something that I try and hold on to. So educate, ask questions, be curious. If you go to another state, another city, hey, what do y'all do for fun? As a leader, that's also your responsibility because you can always bring that back to your environment, right? And don't be afraid to educate others. Hey, this is what I experienced to your team. You should try that out. So education is just the full rim of it, but also be aware what you tolerate, what you laugh at is what you allow.
That's a great turn of phrase, Brianna. If you got that from your mom, way to go, mom.
I used to think she was too strict, but now, whew,
Yeah, and I don't mean to call people out. The behavior that you see that isn't in accordance with how you want your organization to exist,
yeah,
call it in. Call it in. Bring those people in. You don't want to call it out. You don't want to embarrass anybody. There's
right.
no gain in blame or shame, right? So bring people in, educate them, help them grow, and watch the company grow as a result.
You said something. Call it, don't call it out. Bring it in. As a leader, I know on the production floor, if I called it out, that was more noise and chaos.
Mhm.
And bring them in because they may not be aware.
Yeah.
And you can't have the conversation if you're calling it out, adding on to the noise and the chaos. Bring them in, have the conversation, a culturally intelligent conversation.
Yeah, so we have, as leaders, have the opportunity to either create spaces where people feel valued, included, and affirmed, or not, right? And so that's our choice. Do we want to be culturally intelligent communicators who can create that kind of environment for people where they feel valued, included, affirmed, that what they bring to offer means something, that their ideas, that their ways of knowing and doing and being and operating add value and mean something to that space? Because if we're not listening, if we're not paying attention, if we're not inviting those ideas into the space, we can be complicit in a system that continues to marginalize and exclude different populations. So I put on the screen here. I'd love to get some takeaways from what you've heard. So add some thoughts there. Maybe just one thing that you're taking away. We've got one comment here: the culture of the company is defined by the worst behavior. Be authentically empathetic. So as you all are doing this, any final thoughts from you, Lisa or Brianna?
Uh, no, if anybody wants to find me, I'm available on LinkedIn. I love to connect. I love having these conversations. We could go all afternoon, Megan. Brianna, it's been a pleasure to share the mic with you.
Same here. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for everyone that was able to join. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm also always looking to meet new people. So feel free to follow me.
Excellent. And I will add your email or your LinkedIn to the email that I send as a follow-up. So if you all are interested in connecting, please do so. Last thoughts again, thank you to Bossier Parish Community College and to Dana and Monica for their support. I'm so grateful to our panelists, Briana Doucet and Lisa Demore, for all of your amazing contributions that made this conversation really, really rich. And I'm happy to meet you both and look forward to getting to know you better moving forward. As a final sort of aside here, I built a course for Bossier Parish Community College on the topic of communication, and it's a free, it's available to you. It's a 4-module interactive digital course for self-paced learning. And so it's on how to communicate effectively across cultures and styles. And I hope that you'll access that. And I can't leave the hour without telling you about my new book that just came out a couple of weeks ago. It's called Magic Mirror. And so there's a book available as well as a workbook. The workbook is free to download from my website. Kelsey Peterson here on the call was one of my early readers, so really grateful to her. It's available on an ebook, book, and audiobook. So I finished the audiobook and it published, I think last week. And if you're interested in joining me in a conversation on that book, you can register for a March 18th event. And I really welcome and all help I can to get the word of this book out. And it's a modern fable, so it's a narrative story that teaches 9 practices that help us see ourselves, others, and the world differently. And then finally, I just want to again thank you for coming today. Your feedback really is important. And so you can share your feedback with us at engineerinclusion.com/thanks. And you can also request a certificate for today's meeting that you can one-click add to your LinkedIn profile. And so with that, again, I'm so grateful for your time, for your participation today, and I wish you all a wonderful afternoon.
See you later. Thank you.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank y'all so much. You did a great job.
Thank you.
I
Appreciate it.
loved it. Loved it.
Thanks so much.